So down here we can see the upper main bearing shells in the crankcase. It's been oiled, ready to drop this in. The forked rods go on this B side of the engine, and the plain rods in the middle there go down on the A bank side of the engine. I'm guessing the rods are different weights to each other. I've never actually weighed them, but actually the counterweights on the crank are symmetrical. I think, I'm sure I am. Now the main bearing caps, which we'll look at in a minute. There we go, and that is how we do it. So you can, this lifting attachment works. It just fits around these counterweights on the number 4 main bearing, which is the one that has the thrust bearing incorporated into it, as you'll see in a minute. So now we're fitting the main bearing caps. This is one of them, and you can see the bearing shell in there. You might just be able to see the thickness of the bearing material. It's quite a thick steel back, which is what I was explaining earlier. These are all machined. None of these were actually pressed out. The bearing cap itself is an aluminium forging, and they're a very close fit in the crankcase, as you'll see in a minute. Here's a spare centre main bearing shell. So you can see the bronze alloy there, and they had a flashing, as I call it, a very light, very thin layer of white metal plated onto them, which wears away relatively quickly. But if an engine's done, I don't know, 50, 100 hours or so, you can still see certainly some of that material in there. But the main bearing material is the bronze underneath. This is the number 4 main bearing shell for one of these engines, which has the thrust faces on the side of it. So on a lot of modern engines, these thrust bearings tend to be separate, but it's actually all built into one piece on this one. And you can see here as well, one of the issues they get, there's just small amounts of fretting, which is basically these patches you can see on the back of the shell are aluminium from the crankcase that's picked up with just vibration, because even though these are really tightly clamped together, there is movement in the crankcase, because it is by definition quite a light engine for its power output and capacity, and there is a certain degree of flexibility in there. They had quite large problems with fretting on some of the later post-war engines, to the point where they had to make bearing shells eventually, particularly on the civil aircraft, which were doing long hours, where they could machine the crankcase out and then the outside diameter of this would be larger. So this is, and I think this possibly is actually a late one. I think that part number on there is an oversize, either undersize for the crank or oversize on the outside. So I've got up to number 4. I'm gonna incidentally, they got this AL72 on this one, and it's marked onto this side of the crankcase, so it tells you they go that way round. It's got the cylinder, the bearing journal number on it as well. So again, it just makes it that much easier to put the thing together so you don't have to mark things up yourself. In fact, if you look at the two holes in there, that one is smaller than that one because there's a larger diameter section of the bolt down there as well, and that's acting as a dowel. It's actually a location point. So put a bit of oil on it, and these, as I say, these are quite a tight fit. You have to tap them in. Problem is that when you're tapping them in, the bearing shell has a nasty habit of coming off, because some of these you just literally, goes that way around, you literally hold them and that shell will drop out. This one's staying in, but and as you go further down, you get to the point where your finger is just going to get nipped in there, so they're a bit of a pain sometimes. But anyway, I don't think I can push this one in. Sometimes you get them where you can actually push them straight in. No, it's not going to do it. Oh, there we go. Right, it's gone as far as that. That's about as far as it's going to go, so let's knock it in. So I've got my fingers underneath the shell there to stop it dropping out. And it's located in here from rotating, but the shell that's already in the crankcase can actually move. So the shells are only held in one position and the other one self-aligns when they're knit together. Right, so when it's as far as there, the shell's still staying in place, which is a miracle. I'm going to put 2 of the nuts on it, and I'm just going to wind it down the rest of the way. Because if I do that, I'll get to keep my finger, which is quite useful for the next time I come to need it. So wind them on. But we take them off again because there's actually, when we torque them up, there's actually a washer to go underneath these. So I'm going to put number 6 and number 7 in, and then we have to set the thrust bearing. So part of the process of torquing up these main bearing caps is that we do the front 3, the rear 3, which I haven't actually done yet, but then this one I just leave it nipped up so that there's no actual movement in there. It's just with a very small amount of pressure on it. As I mentioned before, this one has the thrust bearing faces on it, and there is, you won't be able to see it, but there's just a very small amount of, just a few thousandths of an inch of play end float in the crankshaft. So what we do is we basically give it a good pull back against the face there, and that has the function of making sure that the upper and lower shells are actually flush and they're not staggered. Having said that, actually they're a very close fit on here and into the crankcase, so there isn't really any movement in them, and typically if you just put the whole thing together they should actually pull up in line because that's how they were machined in the first place. One more thing, this feature here, the oil pressure relief valve, which you'll see later on, is fitted on the side of the crankcase there. These 3 holes feed oil into a gallery that runs along here. So the main oil pressure comes up into the gallery, back down into the front hole on this one, out through into the bearing cap and into the shells, and the same with all of them, so the crankcase is drilled here. This is just the overflow, if you like, from the oil pressure relief valve. So particularly when the engine's cold, with this SAE 50 or Aeroshell 100 oil, which is used in these, the oil pressure can go really high and that will definitely open. So although the gallery is fitted here, this just dumps oil straight down into the lower crankcase where it's picked up by the scavenge pumps. So I'll get and torque all these up, get the oil gallery fitted, and then we can move on to the lower crankcase. Right, that's all the main bearing caps torqued up to 80 pounds-feet. And we'll just check that the crank still moves freely, which it does. Before I put the split pins in these, this engine is also cross-bolted. They call them lateral bolts, and each main bearing cap has two of these running through it. So you put them in and torque them up to 23 pounds-feet, and then I'll just make sure that the crankshaft still turns freely just the same before I put the split pins in these and then the split pins in the lateral bolts, and the job's a good one. So while we're on the subject of crankshafts, here's a really interesting Merlin crank. You can see that it's got additional counterweights welded onto it, and this is known as a Seattle crank, and it's named after the city in Washington, which has been the home to unlimited hydroplane racing, or one of the homes I should say, since the 1950s. After World War II, the choice of engines they had were the Merlin, the Allison V1710, which is a slightly larger engine but very similar, and a few teams also used the Rolls-Royce Griffon, and particularly later on, Budweiser did very well with that engine. And of course Miss Canada 4, which I worked on, had the Griffon. Certain models of the V1710 had a very similar connecting rod assembly to the Merlin, but it was somewhat stronger, and these were used on Merlin engines with Merlin crankshafts. And it was always my thinking that these counterweighted cranks were used with the Allison connecting rods to maintain the balance. And thanks to Mike Barrow for this information. Actually, it's nothing to do with that, because Allison rods are normally fitted on Merlin crankshafts, which are just standard. In fact, this has got more to do with the very high RPMs in the unlimited hydroplanes. They ran the engines up to about 4,400 RPM, and at the higher speeds, the torsional forces in the crank and the flexibility of it and the flexibility of the crankcase meant that it was particularly pulling the main bearing studs out of the crankcase and various other issues, I would imagine probably damaging the bearings as well. And quite surprisingly to me anyway, the addition of these counterweights alleviated those problems. They certainly give the crank more inertia. They wouldn't help the balance, that's for sure, but that's how they got around the problem. You only have to look at the cross-sectional area of these things to see that actually you're pretty much doubling the weight of the counterweights on the engine. Just before I finish this video, somebody asked an interesting question the other day, which is, did the Merlin ever have a different design of connecting rod? This one in the front here is the same as in fact it's from another Merlin 20, and from 1942 they actually strengthened the conrod, so you can see that the section of this one is slightly thicker, and that's the only change they made. So this this stronger conrod here is from a Merlin 66, which was one of the engines which could actually produce 2,000 horsepower under certain circumstances. And the early engines had the lighter connecting rod, so they started from 1,000 and about 50 horsepower, and they went up to 1280 on 100 octane fuel. And then after that they went over to the heavier connecting rod, and in fact most Meteor engines used in army tanks also used this later pattern of conrod. Most of them look exactly the same as that. This is all related to how they managed to nearly double the horsepower of the engine over about an 8-year period. They didn't increase the displacement of the engine, so that stayed at 27 litres. They didn't increase the maximum RPM, which they kept at 3,000. They purely did it by increasing the pressure generated by the supercharger, so they were pushing more air into the engine. And they did this by testing until effectively something broke. That was the main strategy, and then they strengthened it. So here they strengthened the connecting rods, strengthened various other bits of the engine, the pistons in particular, and another major change they made to it was going from a single piece cylinder block, which is on the Merlin 20 that we're working on here, to a separate cylinder head which gave a better seal. So let's have a look at the difference between these two. So in metric, it's 4mm, that web there. That one's 5.6, and they also increase the dimension across here, so The earlier one is 16.2, just over 5/8 of an inch in real money, and this is 90, just over 19, so that's 3/4 of an inch. So if you cut through these, the cross-sectional area of that one is quite a lot bigger than that. It's not just a little bit. One thing that does happen when you do this is it makes the conrod heavier, which has implications on the strength of these bolts. So if you did want to increase the maximum RPM, it would be even more difficult with this. But at the same time, if you did it with this conrod, the conrod might not be strong enough. So there are all sorts of trade-offs. Like everything in engineering, it's a compromise. So supercharger wise, the engine started off at 6.25 psi above atmospheric pressure on the very early engines. They also introduced 100 octane fuel in 1941, which enabled them to push the boost up to 12. And when they made 2000 horsepower, they were doing that at 25 psi. They also had engines on test beds making 30 and 36 psi as well, which sort of made powers up to about 2650 horsepower. But these were never used in aircraft. So the next one I'm going to move on to is assembling the lower crankcase or the sump. We'll have a look at all the oil pumps in the next episode.